Let me just introduce Carlos Garrido. Carlos is a Cuban-American PhD student, instructor in philosophy at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. He has an MA in philosophy from the same institution. And Carlos also does a lot of other things. He's an editor at the Midwestern Marx Institute, which is a co-sponsor of this program. And please check out their website. They have lots of interesting things going on there. And also editor of the Journal of American Socialist Studies. Carlos is the author of a book that's about to come out. It's called The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. He has also edited and introduced a really important work called Marxism and the Dialectical Materialist Worldview, an anthology of classical Marxist texts on dialectical materialism. He also writes very extensively in popular and scholarly modes, usually on topics related to Marxist theory, US socialist history, and global struggles against imperialism. So Carlos, please go ahead. You have about 10 minutes, but yeah, slightly flexible 10 minutes if you need it.
Thank you, Radhika and the IMG. I'm honored to be here and to give some of my thoughts on that heroic event from 152 years ago. And thank you, Professor Hammond, for such a wonderful presentation. There are three central points that I would like to emphasize in my talk. The first concerns the worldview through which Marx and Engels study the Commune. The second, the relevance of their conclusions. And the third, the new lessons we may draw from the many communes we've had since the dawn of the 20th century. So the first, as I'm sure most of you know, 6 months before the communards would officially be at war with the French government, Marx would say that any attempt at upsetting the new government in the present crisis would be a desperate folly. As time passed and the antagonism between the bourgeois government and the Parisian workers intensified, culminating in open war by March 18th, and in the proclamation of the Commune the week after, Marx's attitude completely changed. Far from considering what they were doing to be a desperate folly, he would say, what resilience, what historical initiative, what a capacity for sacrifice in these Parisians. They were storming the heavens, and history has no like example of such greatness. I think the meaning of this transformation is often overlooked. Emphasis is usually laid on the conclusions Marx and Engels derived from the Commune. However, I think that it is in analyzing this transition where we understand the essence of Marxism, that is, the worldview through which we approach reality. Only in doing this can we ourselves do with the many socialist experiments of the 20th and 21st century what Marx and Engels did with the Commune. So, what deeper meaning lay in this transition from skeptic to ardent supporter? Quite simply, the fact that Marx and Engels were not concerned with having material reality measure up to an ideal in their heads. They studied, unlike the Western Marxists, the real movement of history which abolishes the present state of things. They were concerned with the dialectical development of people's struggles, with drawing lessons from these and adjusting their theoretical understanding in accordance with the forms the struggles in the real world discovered. The Paris Commune was not pure. It contained ideological deviations from Marxism, and to a certain extent, it could be said that its key ideological orientation was Blanquist and Proudhonist. However, this never stopped Marx and Engels from supporting and learning from their revolutionary efforts. In complete contrast to this dialectical materialist worldview, which prioritizes the material world and observes it in its development, contradictions, and interconnections with everything else, the Western Marxists have, over the last century, used the purity fetish outlook to approach the socialist experiments which have arisen and abolished in various forms the present state of things. They have consistently produced nothing but petty criticisms of real socialist experiments, condemning reality because it fails to measure up to the ideal which they call socialism in their heads. Few things are more common than seeing Western Marxists start their books and articles with condemnations of socialism in the USSR, China, Cuba, the DPRK, and others as authoritarian, Stalinist, state capitalist, or my personal favorite because of its paradoxical character, not real socialism. Those things which they consider to be failures in these projects are magnified, decontextualized, and synecdochally painted as the whole experience. Samir Amin put it nicely in respect to China when he said that China bashing panders to the infantile opinion found in some currents of the powerless Western left. If it is not the communism of the 23rd century, it is a betrayal. It is clear that the truth of this statement spans well beyond just China. It is grounded in the purity fetish outlook, a form of engagement with the world which couldn't be any farther from Marx and Engels' dialectical materialist worldview. If we are to celebrate, as we are, the Paris Commune by reflecting on the relevance of Marx and Engels' insights on it, without a doubt, the question of the worldview through which they approach the world is of utmost importance. Without this, their genuine insights are merely dead conclusions, severed from the form of thinking which would allow us to do today what Marx and Engels did 152 years ago, namely, learn from the dialectical movement of the working masses towards freedom. My second point. In emphasizing the worldview behind Marx and Engels' assessments of the Commune, I am not saying that the conclusions drawn are unimportant or outdated. Both the worldview and the conclusions must be seen in light of each other, and each in light of their context. The fundamental lesson of the Commune, however, remains today as relevant and true than ever. In the preface to the 1872 German edition of the Manifesto, Marx and Engels would make only one correction to that historical document explicit. They would say, one thing especially was proved by the Commune, namely that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purpose. It was not simply the case that the modern state was a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie, but also that the state institutions through which this aim was achieved, that is the standing army, police, bureaucracy, clergy, judicature, and so on, were designed precisely for the sake of this function. The proletariat cannot successfully wield state power through state institutions crafted to keep labor subordinate to capital. For the proletariat, as the Manifesto urges, to be organized as the ruling class, it needed to smash the existing bourgeois state and replace it with working class institutions of a fundamentally different order. The Commune showed that the state had to be transformed from being a special force for the suppression of a particular class to the suppression of the oppressors by the general force of the majority of the people, the workers and the peasants. Hence, Marx says that Paris could only resist because the first decree of the Commune was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people. Similar qualitative transformations occurred in the Commune's treatments of public officials, suffrage, education, judicature, and so on, in each case destroying the state as the parasitic excrescence which represses labor for the sake of capital, and putting in its place a genuinely democratic working class state which would use the general force of society to repress the old exploiting classes and administer state functions in the interest of the mass of people. This is what the dictatorship of the proletariat as a higher form of socialist democracy entails. This lesson is more vital today in our neo-imperialist stage of capitalism, as Cheng and Fu labels it, than it was in 1871, and perhaps even more vital than it was in 1916 at the time of Lenin's major writings on imperialism. Today, any revolutionary process which sustains even the smallest space for bourgeois political parties and participation will be leaving the door open for imperialism's entry through its collaboration with the national bourgeoisie. We have seen this occur repeatedly since at least the overthrow of Allende's Chile in 1973. As of recent, we have seen this in Lula and Dilma's Brazil, in Ortega's Nicaragua, in Chavez and Maduro's Venezuela, and in Evo's Bolivia. In each of these experiments, the national bourgeoisie collaborated with imperialism to attempt to overthrow, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, the popular revolutions through various means, from lawfare coups to astroturf protests to presidential kidnappings. It is clear that insofar as the bourgeois state structure remains, even if under the control of a workers' or socialist party, a window will always be open for the national bourgeoisie to collaborate with imperialism in bringing forth what W.B. Du Bois called a counter-revolution of property. It is much more difficult to imagine a clownish figure like Guaido or a fascist figure as Jenny Agnès getting as far as they did under worker states like Cuba, China, Vietnam, and the DPRK. Why is this the case? Let us recall the categorical distinction Mao makes in 1957 between political and economic capital, while sustaining that economic capital does not necessarily have to be stripped all at once. That is, as Marx had already noted, that it can be wrested by degree in accordance with the role it plays in developing the productive forces for socialism. On the other hand, political capital, Mao would go on to say, must be deprived until not one jot is left to the capitalist. This is where revolutions like the Bolivarian, the Bolivian, the Nicaraguan, and others, for all their successes, have fallen somewhat short. They have not been able to fully expropriate the political capital of the bourgeoisie, and neither have they been able to, subsequently, complete the process of the proletarianization of the state, that is, of the construction of the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is not a condemnation. I am, like Marx and Engels were with the Commune, an ardent supporter of these emancipatory movements. I consider there to be a lot to learn from them. But as Marx and Engels had already noted with the Commune, in not going far enough in their use of the repressive apparatuses of the worker state, the door was left open for counter-revolution. As Engels wrote in 1872, would the Paris Commune have lasted even a single day if it had not made use of this authority of the armed people against the bourgeoisie? Should we not, on the contrary, reproach it for not having used it freely enough? These sentiments were repeated years later by Lenin, who said that the Commune, instead of destroying its enemies, it sought to exert moral influence over them, and in doing so ultimately gave Versailles time enough to gather its dark forces and prepare for the blood-soaked week of May. Without a doubt, these recent Latin American experiments in 21st century socialism have succeeded in making this transition in various areas. Who can forget, for example, the 8 Silver Corps mercenaries caught in 2020 by Venezuelan fishermen and Bolivarian militias in the coastal town of Choao? What a better example of the general force of the people taking up the role of repressing the enemies of the revolution. However, the threat presented by imperialist hybrid warfare, it seems to me at least, can be better averted as bourgeois state institutions are overcome and proletarian and popular ones are put in their place. My third point, as I'm sure I am quite short on time by now, I'd like to be quick with this one. It has been 152 years since the heroic effort of the communards. Since then, we have seen revolutionary movements erupt in virtually every country on the planet, some which have yet to grab power, some which grabbed power and then lost it, and others which still hold on to power. If we approach these experiments as Marx and Engels did the Commune, I think at least 2 key lessons can be drawn from them, both of which were already implicit in Marx and Engels, but become explicit in the experience of 20th and 21st century socialist movements. The first, it is imperative that after the conquest of political power, the development of the productive forces, the sciences and technologies, and the defense and securities of a country are emphasized. Without these developments, which are made increasingly difficult by the reality of imperialism and its global dominance over intellectual property, a socialist project will not be able to flourish. Without these developments, the global inequality between the looting imperialist powers and everyone else, or to use the despicable metaphor from EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell, the inequalities between the garden and the jungle, will not be bridged, and the imperialist powers will maintain their global position unthreatened. The success of China, which stands today as the beacon of a new post-Columbian, in the sense of 1492, world, testifies to the immense importance of these developments in the battle against capitalist imperialism. In our age, after the experience of the Soviet new economic policy, of Yugoslavia's socialist market economy, and most importantly, of China's reform and opening up, where socialist markets have been developed and private ownership sustains a large yet auxiliary role in the development of the productive forces, we have learned that this development can take many forms, that it does not necessarily require, as Marx and Engels at times imply, the immediate and full-fledged expropriation of the expropriators. In some cases, such as Cuba, the full expropriation of the expropriators was of immediate necessity. In other cases, such as China, the development of socialism has always maintained, since the pre-49 liberated areas, a mixed economic form, where private property and markets exist as an auxiliary of the centrally planned state economy. Far from using cherry-picked comments from Marx and Engels to condemn these developments, we should do with them what they did with the Commune, that is, learn from them, see how these forms have become necessary for the real movement of history which abolishes the present state of things. My second point, in terms of the lessons that we've had from the post-Commune communes, dialectics in both Hegel and in Marxism rejects the traditional idea in philosophy of an abstract universal, of a thing that exists in the same form throughout space and time. Instead, it holds that universals are always concrete, that they take form or concretize themselves through the particular. What does this tell us about socialism? Well, simply that there could be no such thing as abstract socialism. Socialism is the universal which cannot exist unless concretized through the particular. In every country it has taken root in, socialism has had to adapt itself to the unique characteristics of the peoples which have waged and won the struggle for political power. In China, this has taken the form of socialism with Chinese characteristics. In Cuba, it has meant incorporating José Martí and the anti-colonial traditions into socialist construction. In Venezuela, this has taken the form of Bolivarian socialism, and so on and so forth. In each case, the struggle has been, as Georgy Dimitrov had already noted in 1935, national in form and socialist in content. In various parts of the US left, the purity fetish outlook has obscured this historical lesson and made rampant the phenomenon which Dimitrov called national nihilism. Our people's history is reduced to slavery, settler colonialism, imperialism, and all the evils of capital and the state. In doing so, they reject drawing from their national past to give form to socialist content. Far from the progressivism they see in this outlook, what these positions actually depict is a liberal tinted American exceptionalism, which thinks that the struggle for socialism in the US will itself not have to follow this concrete universal tendency seen around the world, where socialism functions, again, as the content which takes form according to the unique characteristics in which it is being developed. This has prevented the US left from genuinely learning from its progressive history and connecting with its people. A perfect example of this is the fact that from 1865 to the counter-revolution of 1876, in previous Southern slave states, Reconstruction developed a dictatorship of labor. This dictatorship was headed by the Black proletariat, who had been emancipated, who had emancipated itself from chattel slavery through a general strike, which won the Second American Revolutionary War. It's also called the Civil War. It was organized by the Freedmen's Bureau and defended militarily by the federal government. It was, in a sense, our Paris Commune, which started before and lasted longer than the original, and which, like the Commune, fell thanks to a counter-revolution of property. Besides the few on the US left, which take the work of the great Dr. Du Bois serious, this legendary experience of a new workers' democracy, not unlike the Commune, is largely erased and forgotten from our people's revolutionary history. Whether we consider the Paris Commune the first modern dictatorship of the proletariat or give that title to the Black proletariat during Reconstruction is somewhat irrelevant. What matters, in my view, is that the Paris Commune, as Lenin argued, by fighting for the freedom of toiling humanity, of all the downtrodden and oppressed, is still being honored 152 years after its fall by the proletariat of the whole world. That is why, in the words of Lenin, the cause of the Commune did not die. It lives to the present day in every one of us. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.